Okay, here we go. Maybe the third time will be the charm. Having a lot of technical difficulties today, but hopefully now everything is right. So, welcome back to our virtual edition, Mr. Berurah Show. We're holding Mr. Berurah Chelik Hey, Mirza Hashem. Today we will be learning Daf Kuf Lamed Hey Amid Beis and Kuf Lamed Vav Amid Aleph. Since we did fall behind a few days, we're going to try to catch up. We are holding in Siman Tuf Kuf Tes Vav. We did not yet begin Sif Aleph in the Mechaber. We did the rather lengthy Hagdama of the Chavetz Chaim to Siman Tuf Kuf Tes Vav. That's on Kuf Lamed Hey Amid Aleph. Now we're going to begin the words of the Mechaber. Siman Tuf Kuf Tes Vav. Din Dvarim Haba'im B'Yom Tov Michutz L'Tchum. The halacha regulating items that come from outside of the Tchum on Yom Tov. Ubayt Tes Seifim. And here we have 9 Seifim. It says the Mechaber in Sif Aleph. Einoi Yehudi, a non-Jew, Shehevi Dairan Yisrael b'Yom Tov, who brings a gift to a Yid on Yom Tov. Im yesh miminoi b'mechuber. Let's say he brings a gift and he brings a bushel of apples to a Yid on Yom Tov. And this Yid lives in an area where there are a lot of apple orchards, and most of the apples are still on the trees. So most of the apples are still b'mechuber. Im yesh miminoi b'mechuber, if that type of item that the non-Jew is bringing to the Jew on Yom Tov is still typically found b'mechuber, it's still attached to the ground or it's still attached to the tree. Oy shemachusar tzeda, or let's say he brings him a chicken. He knows that the Yid is celebrating Yom Tov, and you're allowed to shech the chicken on Yom Tov. So the non-Jew has a nice juicy chicken, and he brings the Yid a chicken. He says, here you have a beautiful chicken for your Yom Tov Suda. But the chicken was a chicken, maybe a chicken is not the perfect example. Better would be something that's more mechusar tzeda. He brought him a young goat, something that had to be trapped. And we know that something that's mechusar tzeda is muktzah on Yom Tov. Not only it's muktzah, but it's a malacha. Tzeda, trapping, is not mutar on Yom Tov. Also, the item that the non-Jew brings is forbidden. Af lemi shaloi huva b'shviloi. Even, not only is it also for the Yid that the non-Jew brought it for, but it's also for any other Yid as well. They're not allowed to eat it on that day. So again, what happened over here is the non-Jew brought a gift to a Yid on Yom Tov. He brought him a beautiful bushel of lovely apples. But by and large, the apples have not yet been picked. So most apples are still on the tree. Or he brought him a nice animal, something that the Yid could shecht and eat on Yom Tov. But it's the type of animal that's mechusar tzeda. Maybe you brought him a fish, something that you would generally have to fish for, which you're not allowed to do on Yom Tov. The halacha is that fish, those apples, are osir ba'achila, and not only are they osir ba'achila for the Yid that the guy brought them for, they're osir ba'achila for any Yid. Now let's take a look in the Mishnah Berurah and see what's at play over here. It says the Mishnah Berurah on the bottom of Kuf Lamed Hey Amid Aleph in Ois Katan Aleph, Dairan Yisrael. The case that the Mechaber gives over here is where the non-Jew brought a gift to the Yid. That's a doirin, a gift. Says the Chavetz Chaim, for who adin behavi limkar be'ir sheroiv Yisrael darin ba. The same halacha applies not only if it's a gift. Let's say this guy is a produce merchant. He sells fruits and vegetables. And he brought apples to a Yiddish town in order to sell the apples. Deminastam limkar liyisrael heviyai. So the assumption is, why is this Goyish or produce merchant, why is he coming to the Yiddish town today to sell his wares? He knows it's Yom Tov, and he knows the Yidden not going to be buying. So that means he's bringing it for the Yidden. V'chein similarly, b'katzatz leha'aka mama'os, let's say a non-Jew set a price together with a Yid, lahavi lai peiros oidagim me'erev Yom Tov. A Yid hired a non-Jew to bring him produce or to bring him fish, and the guy was supposed to bring it to him on Erev Yom Tov. On Yom Tov, and he didn't show up on Erev Yom Tov. He showed up on Yom Tov itself. But kuluhu aser, that produce, that fish, would be aser. And we're not going to be matir the produce or be matir the fish by saying that the guy trapped the fish or he picked the apples. He didn't really do it for the yid. He really did it for himself. He knows that he took pay for a job from a yid to deliver the produce, to deliver the fish. He wants to make sure that he fills his contract and he does what he was supposed to do. Or simply put, he wants to make sure he makes his money. So he's not doing any malacha. He's not doing the malacha of fishing. He's not doing the malacha of picking the apples for the yid. He's doing it for himself. No, the Chavetz Chaim points out we don't say that. Because the bottom line is, if the guy picked those apples on Yom Tov, why did he pick them? He picked them in order to deliver them to a yid, so that a yid should be able to eat them and enjoy them on Yom Tov. So that means he did meleches isur, he did malacha that's asur on Yom Tov. He picked apples, something that's asur on Yom Tov, and he did it on behalf of the yid, and that's why they're asur. Ayin bir halacha. Now we go to Ois Cotton Bays. Im yesh miminoi. The Mechaber said, let's say the non-Jew brought the Jew apples. So if the apples typically are still on the tree, so then the Mechaber said the apples are usher to be eaten on Yom Tov. Says in Mishnah Berurah Cotton Bays, Im yesh miminoi b'mechuber, then they're going to be usher. Why are they usher? Why are they usher? Explains the Chavetz Chaim. The machmirinon misveika, because over here we have a suffix. The non-Jew showed up on Yom Tov with a bushel of apples. Now, we don't really know when he picked the apples. Maybe he picked the apples yesterday on Erev Yom Tov, or maybe he picked them last week. We don't know for sure that he picked the apples on Yom Tov. Nevertheless, says the Chavetz Chaim, the machmirinon misveika, misafik, we are going to be machmir, ulai teloshan oitzadan b'yom tov al das lahavion liyisrael. We're going to be machmir, and we're going to worry about the possibility that the apples were picked on Yom Tov or the fish were trapped on Yom Tov. And that means that the guy did forbidden malacha on Yom Tov on behalf of a yid. And therefore, that produce, those apples or those fish, are usher. Now, that's the first rationale that the Mechaber brings here. But now he brings a second one. Now, again, according to what we said right now, we're being machmir misafik. We don't know. We don't know when the apples were picked. We don't know when the fish were fished for. So we're being machmir misafik. Now the Chavetz Chaim says, v'yesh sovereign. However, there are those, and he brings this down in the Sharetzi, and he says that this is a Ran and a Rashba. V'yesh sovereign. There are those who hold that this is not a suffix. It's not that we're being machmir misafik. No, it's really me'ikar adin. We do not assume that the fish were trapped before Yom Tov or that the apples were picked before Yom Tov. De'ein derech roiv anashim litloish mi ba'erev l'tzarech machar, because that's not the derech. Most people fish for what they need for today. So if the non-Jew brought them today, the assumption is he fished for the fish today. If he brought apples today, the assumption is he picked the apples today. So it's not that we're being machmir misafik, it's that the default position is that the malacha was done by the guy today. Unless you look at the apples and you could tell that these apples were already picked a few days ago. Or you look at the fish, or maybe you smell the fish, and you can tell that this is fish that was already fished a couple of days ago. Ice cotton gimel, asur. So we said that this produce that was b'mechuber, we said this type of produce, if the guy brought produce that still is found b'mechuber, or he brought, let's say, fish that are typically mechusar tzeda, then they're asur, siv gimel, ice cotton gimel. Kedin kol malacha ha'asura she'asa hanachri b'shvil Yisrael. This is the halacha that applies anytime a non-Jew does forbidden malacha on behalf of a yid on Yom Tov. The also l'chol Yisrael ad la'erev b'chtei she'yasu. The halacha is, if a non-Jew does forbidden malacha for a yid on Yom Tov or on Shabbos, you're not allowed to derive any benefit from that hana, and everything is usher until after Yom Tov, but not only until right after Yom Tov, until enough time after Yom Tov that malacha could have been performed after Yom Tov. So if a non-Jew baked bagels for you on Pesach, he knows that mostly Pesach, all the Yidden are going to be coming in to buy bagels. If he baked bagels on Yom Tov, those bagels are usher until B'chtei Sheyasu. You have to wait for enough time for them to bake the bagels after Yom Tov. Then the bagels become mutter, but they're not mutter 2 minutes after Yom Tov. Now says the Chavetz Chaim, okay, so what did we say here so far? Right now we explained why are the apples or the fish usher? Because the non-Jew performed forbidden malacha. He picked apples off the tree, or he went out and he fished for fish. That is forbidden malacha. He did it on behalf of a Yid. He brought the apples or the fish to a Yid as a gift, or he brought it to the Yiddish town to sell to Yidden on Yom Tov. So this is forbidden malacha that was performed on behalf of a Yid. So the halacha is everything is aser until after Yom Tov, ad b'chtei sheyasu. Now says the Chavetz Chaim, really, there are more reasons why they're aser. The truth is, the apples and the fish are usher during the day on Yom Tov itself, even without this problem that the goy did forbidden malacha for the Yid. Because if you're talking about apples that were still attached to a tree, or you're talking about fish that had to be fished for, so they were mechusar tzeda, yesh by bisham muktzah. These are muktzah. So there's another reason why the apples and the fish are usher. If the apple was still on the tree when Yom Tov began, so that apple is a muktzah apple. If the fish was still swimming around in the lake at the beginning of Yom Tov, that fish is a muktzah fish. So even if the guy goes ahead and fishes for the fish, or the guy picks the apple and now he brings it to you, they're muktzah. So even without the problem of the fact that you're going to derive benefit from forbidden malacha that was done by a guy for you, there's another problem, which is the things themselves, the items themselves are muktzah. And this, says the Chavetz Chaim, is l'kulei alma. This everyone agrees to, even those shittas that are mekel on muktzah and Yom Tov would agree that these apples or this fish is muktzah. Midaloi liktan me esmael, because since these apples were not picked off the tree before Yom Tov, or the fish were not taken out of the lake before Yom Tov, so then the Yid did not have these apples or these fish on his mind at all, to the extent that we consider it like dried, like figs or dates that you put out to dry, or raisins that you put on the roof to dry, that are not yet dry. Over there we said everybody holds that that's muktzah. If you took grapes and you put them up on the rooftop to dry, you are maktzah them biyadayim. You went ahead and you took them, you put them on the roof. That's a very clear statement that I'm not going to use them on Yom Tov, especially since at the outset of the drying process they're not even roy la'achila. So you are maktzah them biyadayim. There's no way we're going to say they're not muktzah on Yom Tov. So too over here, apples that are on a tree, you didn't pick them before Yom Tov, so that's very clear that you are maktzah them. Midaita, you didn't have in mind to use them at all on Yom Tov, so they're completely muktzah. Now the Chavetz Chaim in the brackets over here says another reason why they're usher. V'gam b'perei shekal and litloish. Also, furthermore, if we're talking about fruits that are very easy to pick, we're talking about apples that grow on a low apple tree. You don't need a keli. You don't need any kind of tool in order to pick them or cut them off the tree. You just stick your hand up and pull. And people have a desire to eat those fruits. We know there's a halacha. Let's say you have an apple tree, and on Yom Tov, apples blew off the tree. They fell off the tree by themselves. So no malacha was done over here. Still in all, those apples are muktzah, and they're usher. You're not allowed to take them. Why are you not allowed to take them? Because there's a gzeira. The gzeira is, if we're going to allow you to take the apples off the ground that fell off the tree, you might come to also pick apples on Yom Tov. So here we have another reason why the apples that the guy brought to you are usher. And that is because if most of the apples are still on the tree, and the apples are very easy to pull off the tree, if we're going to be matter the apples that the guy brought you on Yom Tov, you may go ahead, you may pick apples off the tree. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. And the truth is that this rationale of muktzah, that the apples or the fish are muktzah, that isser applies even if the guy went ahead and picked the apples or did the fishing for himself. Let's say you saw a guy went, he picked apples. You asked him, why do you pick those apples? Oh, I'm taking them home to my wife. My wife is going to make an apple pie. Then you tell him, listen, I'll pay you after Yom Tov, sell me the apples. Now you know that he picked the apples for himself. So he didn't do any forbidden malacha for you. Still in all, the apples are muktzah. Why? Because are aser? Because still the muktzah reason still applies to these apples. Since they were on the tree at the outset of Yom Tov, they're muktzah. So they're aser. Ella, nevertheless, says the Chavetz Chaim, we still need to come on to the reason that the reason these apples are aser is because the guy did forbidden malacha for you on Yom Tov. Why? Elo debitam zeh, because if it would only be for the rationale of muktzah, einay aser elo biyoymai, then the apples would only be aser while it's Yom Tov itself. They're muktzah. That's why they're aser. Muktzah ends the minute Yom Tov is over. So the minute Yom Tov would be over, the apples would be mutter because muktzah is over. But in our case, the Mechaber said that they're aser not only are the Mechaber didn't say it, but we said it so far in the Mishnah Berurah. Not only are they aser on Yom Tov, they're even aser after Yom Tov until the time of a Kidei Sheyasu. You need enough time after Yom Tov that the guy could have gone and could have picked it and brought it to you. That's when it becomes mutter. That's only because of this isser. It's only because the guy did forbidden malacha for you, and you can't derive any benefit from the forbidden malacha that he did. So you have to wait until Chedei Sheyasa after Yom Tov. Muktzah, that wouldn't apply. For muktzah goes off. The isser of muktzah goes off the minute Yom Tov is over. So elabitam zeh einay aser ela b'yoymai. Were it only for the problem of muktzah, the apples would only be aser on Yom Tov itself. Avala erev, but in the evening after Yom Tov, haya mutter miyad kebavur b'sif beis. Then the apples would immediately become mutter because muktzah is over the minute Yom Tov is over. But over here, the halach is that they're aser even b'chtei sheyasa after Yom Tov because of the problem of deriving benefit from the prohibited malacha that the guy did for you. Ice cotton dalid. The Mechaber said that they're aser la'achloi. You're not allowed to eat this produce or eat these fish. Says the Chavetz Chaim, it's not only an Isser Achila, you're not allowed to derive any pleasure from them. Let's say a non-Jew went ahead and picked a hadas branch. We know people like to smell the hadasim. Also, you're not allowed to smell them because, again, you're taking benefit from the prohibited malacha that the guy did for you. Okay. So far, the halacha that the Mechaber says over here in Sif Aleph, very basic malacha. You have a guy did malacha for you on Yom Tov. He went there, he picked apples for you on Yom Tov. He went there, he fished for fish for you on Yom Tov. He brings it to you as a gift, or he brings it to you to sell it to you. It's aser b'achila. You're not allowed to eat it on Yom Tov. You're not allowed to eat it. We saw even you have to wait even b'chtei sheyaseh after Yom Tov. Now says the Ramah on the second line, right by the Ois Cotton Hay for the Mishnah Berurah, Va'afilu avar v'nasan lepiv ula asay. Let's say you didn't realize you took one of those pretty apples and you took a bite and you're already chewing up the apple. What do you do now? Says the Ramah, Va'afilu avar v'nasan lepiv ula asay. Even if you went ahead and you took a bite, asay levolay, you're not allowed to swallow it. It's aser b'achila. Says the Mishnah Berurah is cotton hay. Va'afilu avar v'nasan. Now the Ramah said, even if you transgressed, in other words, you didn't do it by mistake, you did it intentionally. I know the halach is I'm not supposed to eat it. You went there, you took a bite, you started chewing it up. Now suddenly you feel bad about what you did. You got to spit it out. You're not going to say, since I already took a bite, I could continue eating it. Now says the Chavetz Chaim here, nice cotton hay. The same halach is true if you did it b'shoigeg. You forgot that there's any problem over here, and you went ahead and you bit it. You got to spit it out. Umashma mistimas hapoiskim, and from the fact that the poiskim write this in this way and they don't differentiate between whether or not you already made a bracha or not, it would seem that afilu im kfar birech al zeh asur levloya. Let's say you made a borei priya eitz and you went ahead and you took a bite. So now you'll make an argument. Wait, I have to swallow it. I made a bracha already. If I don't swallow it, it's going to be a bracha levatala. Says the Chavetz Chaim, no. From the fact that the poskim don't differentiate and they don't say, well, if you made a bracha already, now you could swallow it b'diavad, it seems that no. Even if you made a bracha, asur levloya, you're not allowed to swallow it. The muktzah kishar achilas iser. It's muktzah, and you're not allowed to eat it, and it's like any other thing that's asur ba'achila. You can't eat a piece of chazer. If you made a shahakal on a piece of chazer, you can't go eat a piece of chazer. You're not allowed to eat it. Now let's continue in the words of the Mechaber. It's on the last line, Kuf Lamed He Amud Beis. So far the Mechaber said that this produce, this fish, is asur ba'achila. Now says the Mechaber, va'afilu l'taltalon asur. Not only are these apples or this fish that the guy brought you on Yom Tov, not only is it asur ba'achila, it's even asur b'tiltal. You're not allowed to handle it. You're not allowed to move it. Says the Mishnah Berurah, an Ois Katan Vav, va'afilu l'taltalon, the muktzah v'chanal. It's muktzah, like we said above in Ois Katan Gimel. These apples are muktzah. They were on the tree on Yom Tov. They're muktzah. Now the Chavetz Chaim says, and there's another reason why they're asur b'tiltal. V'gam also, the kevan the asur ba'achila, since they're asur ba'achila, you have these apples and they're asur ba'achila, memela asur nami b'tiltal, they also become asur b'tiltal. You're not allowed to handle them. First of all, again, they have no use because they're asur ba'achila, but also, so they're asur b'tiltal because of muktzah, but they're also asur because since they're asur ba'achila, we don't want you to handle it. This is similar to a halacha that we saw earlier in Hilchas Pesach. We said chametz is asur b'tiltal on Pesach. It's asur b'negia. We don't want you to touch chametz on Pesach because you might come to eat it. You have these apples over here on Yom Tov that are asur ba'achila. They're asur b'tiltal. Dumya de tevel, similar to the halacha that we see by tevel. If you have produce with trumas and maasros weren't separated, it's tevel, it's asur ba'achila. You don't touch it. And this is not like the halacha of a nevela. If you have a carcass, you have meat, basar nevela. It wasn't geshachten. It's not edible. It's asur ba'achila. Yet it's still mutter b'tiltal. You're allowed to handle the carcass of the animal. This is different than nevela, which is mutter b'tiltal, even though it's asur b'achila. Hasam chazia leklavim. Over there by the nevela, that's something that's usable as dog food. So there's a reason to be metaltal it. And we're not going to asur it in tiltal and say that you might come to eat it. No, it's dog food. We're not afraid that you're going to go eat dog food. Over here, in our scenario over here, where the guy brought you apples, you have no intent on feeding it to dogs. It's something that you're going to eat, but it's asur ba'achila on Yom Tov. And you're not bodil minei. You're not separated from it. Nevela, there's another reason why we don't have to make it asur b'tiltal. Nevela, you know it's a davar asur. You know it's a meichel that's asur. So we're not so afraid that you're going to come to pick it up and eat it once it's mutter b'tiltal. But over here, where we're talking about these apples that are asur ba'achila, they seem to be perfectly kosher apples. So if we're going to allow you to eat it, to touch it, we're afraid you might come to eat it. V'gam, and another reason why there's a difference between nevela and let's say these apples. V'gam the nevela any surah machmas iser hayoim. By nevela, the nevela is intrinsically asur. The nevela is not asur because let's say Hilchas Shabbos or Hilchas Yom Tov. It's intrinsically asur. So when you see a nevela, you know it's asur ba'achila. We're not afraid that if you handle a nevela, you're going to come to eat it. But the apples are not intrinsically asur. They're asur because of a halacha in Hilchas Shabbos or Hilchas Yom Tov, that since they were picked on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to eat them. But it's not intrinsically asur. Therefore, we have to make them asur b'tiltal. Masha'enke nevela doesn't have to be asur b'tiltal. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. Umitam zeh afilu le'erev shu tchilas yom acher Kevin Aser Ba'achila Ad Kedei Sheyaseh Memela Nami Aser Betiltel. This Isser of tiltal, where we have an Isser tiltal, because we're afraid that you might come to eat it, so that Isser tiltal is going to apply as long as there's an Isser Achila. And the Isser Achila, we said, extends even after Yom Tov into the time of B'chtei Sheyaseh. So since the Isser Achila extends after Yom Tov until B'chtei Sheyaseh, the Isser Tiltal also extends until the time of B'chtei Sheyaseh. If the only Isser Tiltal would be because of Muktzah, again, it would end the minute Yom Tov is over. But over here, the Isser Tiltal is also because of the Isser Achila. And the Isser Achila doesn't end until B'chtei Sheyaseh, so the Isser Tiltal also doesn't end until B'chtei Sheyaseh. We'll see that when we go weiter. Okay, now let's go weiter here in the Mechaber. The bottom line, by me in the middle of the line, says the Mechaber. So, these apples, this fish is aser on Yom Tov, but v'la erev mutarim b'chtei sheyeyasu. In the evening, after Yom Tov is over, as we're going to see in the Mishnah Berurah. Right now, in the Mechaber is talking about either in Eretz Yisrael, where there's only one day of Yom Tov, or in Chutz La'aretz, and he's talking about the second day of Yom Tov. The apples are aser, the fish is aser. When do they become mutter? Right after Yom Tov is over, b'chtei sheyaseh. So if it's apples, you have to wait. When Yom Tov is over, you have to wait 15 minutes. That the guy could have already picked the apples and brought them to you. And then they become mutter. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Zayin, B'chtei sheyaseh. Why do these apples have to remain aser even after Yom Tov is over until the time of B'chtei sheyaseh? Kedei shelo yehana mimalacha shenases b'shvil Yisrael b'Yom Tov. Because the problem over here is the guy picked the apples on Yom Tov. I can't gain any benefit from the act of the non-Jew picking the apples on Yom Tov, because you're not allowed to pick apples on Yom Tov. So I have to wait that until there's enough time after Yom Tov that the apples could have been picked. Now, if I eat the apple, I'm no longer deriving benefit from the fact that the malacha was done on Yom Tov. For my purposes, the malacha could have been done after Yom Tov too. That's why you have to wait b'chtei sheyaseh. And the Mishnah Berurah explains that here in Ois Katan Zayin, Kedei shelo yehana mimalacha shenases b'shvil Yisrael b'Yom Tov. V'kevan shemamtin shir kedei sheyehana b'choil. Once you wait after Yom Tov for the amount of time that now I could have derived the same benefit after Yom Tov, shov ein einenis b'malachas Yom Tov. So that means I'm not deriving any benefit from malacha that was done on Yom Tov. Now, I told you that the Mechaber over here was talking about either in Eretz Yisrael with his one day Yom Tov or in Golus, but he was talking about on the second day of Yom Tov. Now you'll see why I said that. Now continues the Mechaber, and the Mechaber says, the last few words on Kuf Lamed Hei Beis. Ubishnei Yomim Tovim Shel Golius. Let's say we're talking about Shnei Yom Tovim of Golius, and Yom Tov was Tuesday and Wednesday. Oh, now the Mechaber says, Imhuva b'yom rishon. Let's say the non-Jew brought you the apples on the first day of Yom Tov. So, okay, he brought you apples on Yom Tov. The apples are aser. Why are they aser? Well, they're muktzah. Also, he brought them to you on Yom Tov. That means he did malacha on Yom Tov for you, so the apples are aser. But imhuva b'yom rishon mutter miyad b'leil Yom Tov sheni b'chtei sheyeyasu. So if Yom Tov is Tuesday, Wednesday, and the guy brought you the apples on Tuesday, they become mutter Tuesday night after the time of Kedei Sheyaseh, even though Wednesday is still Yom Tov. The apples are only aser for the day of Yom Tov that the guy brought them on, and after Yom Tov for the time period of Kedei Sheyaseh. But on the second day, they're mutter. And even on the second night of Yom Tov, on Tuesday night, after the time period of Kedei Sheyaseh, the produce becomes mutter. At least this is according to the sheet of the Mechaber. Let's see in the Mishnah Berurah is Katan Ches. Ubishnei Yom Tovim Shel Golius. Demei Ikara. Before this phrase in the Mechaber, Mayri Beretz Yisrael, the Mechaber was talking about Yom Tov in Eretz Yisrael. Shehu Rak Yom Echad. We only have one day of Yom Tov. Oy b'chutz la'aretz, or he could be talking about the 2 days of Yom Tov in chutz la'aretz, but v'nasa hamalacha b'Yom Tov sheni, but the guy did the malacha, he picked the apples and he brought you the apples on the second day of Yom Tov. Demamten ad la'erev shehu chayil. So you have to wait until Matzah Yom Tov b'chtei sheyaseh for the apples to become mutter. The kan, but now over here, when the Mechaber says that b'shnei Yom Tovim shel Goliath, over there, Haisif, now the Mechaber is adding a new halacha. And he's saying, Af b'shnei Yom Tovim shel Goliath, when you have Shnei Yom Tovim shel Goliath, shel erev Yom Rishon Yom Tovhu, so the second night, the erev, the evening after the first day of Yom Tov is Yom Tov, it's going into the second day of Yom Tov. Afilu hachi, nevertheless, ein tzarich lahamtin le'erev Yom Tov Rishon. Ein tzarich lahamtin le'erev Yom Tov Rishon. Af lemisha huva b'shvilai rak kadei sheyasu was. You only have to wait until Matzah of the first day of Yom Tov. You have to wait b'chtei sheyaseh. But you don't have to wait any more than that. You don't have to wait on the second day of Yom Tov. And this halach is true, says the Chavetz Chaim, even for the yid that the guy brought the produce for. He brought it on the first day of Yom Tov. The produce is asur on the first day of Yom Tov, and it's asur that evening until the time of Chtei Sheyaseh. But the second night of Yom Tov and the second day of Yom Tov, it'll be mutter. And he explains now why. The Miman of Shach, because this is the same Miman of Shach that we use on the 2 days of Yom Tov Shel Goliath that we've seen already many times. The Miman of Shach, Yom Echad Chaylhu. We know one of the 2 days of Yom Tov Shel Goliath is a regular weekday. So the Im Yom Rishon Kodesh. So then if the first day of Yom Tov was Kodesh, so the day that the guy brought the apples was Kodesh, Halay Akshav Chayil. So then tonight, the second night of Yom Tov is already starting the weekday. So I only have to wait the b'chtei sheyaseh after the first day of Yom Tov is over, and now the apples become mutter. And if Tuesday, the first day of Yom Tov, was actually a weekday, so then what's the problem at all? So then whatever malacha the guy did, he picked the apples, it was malachas heter. It was a regular weekday. And then I don't have to wait at all because there's no reason to ask them at all. Okay, that was the shita of the Mechaber. Now we're going to go into the Ramah, and we're going to see that the Ramah is chaylik on this. Says the Ramah, Hago. V'yesh machmirin, there are those who are machmir, la'asrei ad matzah yom tov sheni. And they say that no, the apples remain asr until b'chtei sheyaseh matzah, the second day yom tov. Now he brings this down in parentheses from the Torah in the name of Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi and the Smag. We're going to see in the Mishnah Berurah that Rashi over here is a Toyas Hatfus. The Mechaber Shita is the Shita of Rashi. This more Machmer opinion is not the Shita of Rashi, it's the Shita of the Rush. So over here where it says Rashi, it should say the Rush. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Eis Cotton Test. V'yesh machmirin, there are those shitas that are machmir. Tesfir lahu. Why are they machmir? Because they hold the ikra iser. The main reason why this produce is aser is not just because the guy did malacha for you and muktzah and this and that, and we don't want you to be nene after Yom Tov for the malacha that the guy did. No, the main reason it's aser is the isharis lay, because if we will allow you to use these apples that were brought by the guy, Shema Yomer Laha'akum Lasois, Shema Yomer Laha'akum Lasois, you might turn around and you might specifically ask the guy to do malacha for you. We can't be matir apples that the guy picked and brought for you, because if we do, you might come to ask a guy on Yom Tov, go pick apples for me. And that would be 100% aser. That's a mir lakum. That's aser. V'lachein, and therefore, af b'yom tov sheni aser ad la'erev b'shahar ru'uya la'asiyah. If that's the main rationale for the iser, so then if the guy brought you the apples on the first day of Yom Tov, we're not going to be matir them on the second day of Yom Tov. If we're matir them on the second day of Yom Tov, so then next year, what are you going to do? You're going to ask a guy to bring you apples on the first day of Yom Tov so that you can eat them on the second day of Yom Tov. So weiter, the guy is going to be doing malacha for you. Di'lav akati yesh ligzar. We would still have to make a gzera. Sheyarma la'akum. We're going to be afraid that you might tell a non-Jew lazes b'yom rishon to go pick apples for you on the first day Yom Tov, kedei lahachin liyom tov sheni, so that they should be prepared for use on the second day of Yom Tov. Skip the brackets here. Achein yesh omrim diyesh kula gam l'deyazu. However, there are those that say that even according to this more stringent opinion that the Ramah brings, who says that the produce, the apples, remain usher even on the second day of Yom Tov, there's still a kula. The leditu ain't usher kol yom sheni elul isa Yisrael shehuva b'shviloi. Then the apples would only be usher on the second day for the yid that the guy brought them for. Aval l'shari Yisrael mutar miyad be'erev rishon ve'ein tzarich lahamten af b'chdei sheyeyasu. If the reason for the Yisr over here is that we're afraid if we allow you to eat the apples that the guy brought for you, next year you might ask the guy to go pick apples for you. In that case, there's also a kula that comes out, which is that really only applies to the yid that the guy brought it for. If you're going to see that a guy brought you apples, next year you might come to ask him to bring you apples. But another yid has nothing to do with this. So for him, the apples are also on Yom Tov itself because they're muktzah. But the minute Yom Tov is over, they become mutter. There's no reason to ask them. Ois cotton yud. So this sheet is machbar ad matzah Yom Tov sheni v'hainu gam kein b'chtei sheyaseh. According to this sheet, you would have to wait until after the time of chtei sheyaseh on Yom Tov sheni. Ois cotton yud aleph Torah b'shem Rabbeinu Tam v'Rashi to Sefer, where it says that Rashi is a Sefer. The Rashi who ikudei Rishayna. Rashi is really the sheet brought down by the Mechaber. V'tzarich leimer v'harash, and instead of Rashi, it should say here v'harash. Now we go back to the words of the Ramah, second line down from the top of the page. By me, it's the middle of the line. So we had the sheet of the Mechaber. Again, just to recapture over here, because this is a little complex. According to the Mechaber, you have 2 days Yom Tov of Golus. Yom Tov is Tuesday and Wednesday. A guy brought you apples on Tuesday afternoon. The apples are usher for the whole day of Tuesday, and they're usher Tuesday night after the Zman for the time of Chdei Sheyaseh. But after that, Tuesday night and Wednesday, they're mutter, even though it's still Yom Tov. They're mutter anyway. Why? Because B'mamashach. If Tuesday was Yom Tov, so then yes, we have to answer the apples because the guy did malacha on Yom Tov for you. So we answered the apples for Tuesday, and we answered them Tuesday night, B'chdei Sheyaseh. But after that is a regular weekday. So you can go ahead and the apples become mutter. If Wednesday is Kadosh, all right, so then there's no problem at all. The guy picked the apples on Tuesday. It was a weekday. There was no Meleches Yisr at all. So Wednesday, the apples become mutter. That was the sheet of the Mechaber. The Ramah said that there's a more machmedic opinion who says that there's 2 day Yom Tov. The guy brings you apples on Tuesday. The apples are also on Tuesday. They're also Tuesday night. They're also Wednesday. They're also until Wednesday night after the Zman of Chdei Sheyaseh. Why? Because if we're going to be matter you at any point on Yom Tov, the fruits of malacha that were done by the guy, so we're going to be matter those apples to you that the guy brought, even if we're going to be matter them on Yom Tov Sheni. So the next year, you're going to go ask the guy to pick apples for you on Yom Tov Rishon so that they should be mutter on Yom Tov Sheni. Now says the Ramah, the minig is to be machmir like this more stringent opinion. Im einoy tzarich Yom Tov, unless you need the apples for tzarich Yom Tov, you were counting on them for dessert. Litzarich orchim, not for yourself, but in order to feed them to guests. You need dessert for your guests. 10 guests showed up on Yom Tov, and you need dessert for the guests, so you want to use those apples. You yourself don't want to eat the apples, but you want to be able to serve the apples to your guests. Ubekai gavdo, or such a similar case. Then we could be makel la'acherim shalehuva b'shvilan. Then we're being makel, we're allowing you to serve the apples to the guests. But the guy didn't bring the apples for the guests. The guy brought the apples for you. So over here, we're going to combine a lot of kulas, and we're going to say, in this case, you could be makel and you could serve the apples to the guests. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Ois Cotton Yud Beis, L'tzarech Archim Shalehuva B'Shvilan. Pirishu. This is the Ramaz explaining himself. The reason for this kula is Kevin Chalihuva Bishvilon, because the Ramah told you could be makel if you have a tzarich yom tov for guests. So that means you have a tzarich yom tov, you need to serve dessert for your guests, but it's not for you. The guy brought it for you. We're not being makel for you. We're being makel for your guests. But if there isn't a tzarich, you wouldn't be makel even for other people. V'dan, you should know when we say that we could treat your guests like acherim, not that it's not pshat that you're letting the yid that the guy brought the produce for eat it. We're saying the guests are considered acherim. Yesh mefarshim danu dafka keshehizminon acher she'aveu hadorin. That's only if you invited these guests after this gift from the non-Jew already showed up. So then it's obvious that the produce was not brought by the guy for the guests. The guests were only invited after the guy dropped off the produce. But if they're guests that you already invited before, then those guests are considered like your b'nei bayis. When we say that it's also for the one that the guy brought it for, it doesn't only mean him himself, it means him, his wife, his kids, all his b'nei baisai. Okay, Ois Cotton Yud Gimel, it's our Archim Shaloi Huva Bishvilon. Vim Kotat Zema Akome Erev Yom Tov Sheyaviu Loi Bezman Heter. Let's say you made up with a guy that he should bring you produce on Erev Yom Tov. V'hei Meviu Loi B'Yom Tov Rishon. And the guy showed up with it on the first day of Yom Tov. So we already mentioned this case previously, and we said that the produce is definitely still usher for the first day of Yom Tov, even though you made up with the guy that he should bring it on the first day of Yom Tov, on Erev Yom Tov, but he brought it on the first day of Yom Tov, they're usher. But yesh lahakal b'Yom Tov shein yilachik k'dei sheyaseh af la'isa Yisrael ba'atzma yeshuva b'shviloi. But in that case, we could be makel, and we could go like the opinion of the Mechaber, and we could say that the apples will become mutter after b'chtei sheyaseh of the second night of Yom Tov. If you have very much extenuating circumstances, you could rely in Gansen on the sheet of the Mechaber, and you could be matter the produce even for the yid that it was brought on his behalf. Okay, we're going to stop over here. Mirz Hashem, tomorrow we'll pick up on the top of Kuf Lamed Vav Amud Beis, V'chein Huva B'Yom Tov Sheni. Thank you so much for joining me for Libat HaTorah. Be well.